Hello everyone. In the previous lecture, we began with summarizing the methods of conceptualizing alternative histories and historiographies. One such model we talked about is the subaltern history. Subaltern history, and in fact subaltern historiography, is a way of writing history that centers on the experiences of marginalized and oppressed groups, people whose voices are often left out of the mainstream history. Developed by scholars like Ranajit Guha, it questions the traditional histories written from the perspective of powerful elites, whether they are colonial rulers, nationalist readers, or upper caste groups. Subaltern historians believe that everyday people like peasants, tribal communities, and lower castes are also shaped by history through their struggles, resistance, and experiences, all of which are ignored in the dominant narratives. By focusing on these perspectives, subaltern historiography tries to create a more inclusive and accurate understanding of the past. It challenges the idea that only organized, elite-led movements matter, emphasizing that even those seen as powerless have agency and a role in shaping history. In today's lecture, we will focus on other notable theorists and their theorizations of Dalit movements and Dalit historiography. Let us begin with Gail Omvedt. In her book, Dalits and Democratic Revolution, which was published in 1994, Omvedt defines Dalit and non-Brahmin anti-caste movements as anti-systemic movements or value-oriented movements which challenged and sought to transform the basic structure of the Indian social system, replacing caste and the accompanying social oppression, economic exploitation, and political domination by an egalitarian or equalitarian society. In other words, we see how Omvedt combines and brings together the various dimensions of caste through its social, political, and economic aspects. These movements differentiated from the 19th century nationalist and reformist movements such as Gandhi's Harijan movement in the way that while Harijan movement aimed to cleanse Hinduism of impure practices and build a new society where everyone was included within the umbrella of Hinduism, the anti-caste movements aimed to annihilate caste system altogether. The problem with Gandhi's conceptualization of Harijan was his attempt at assimilating and including everyone under the Hindu fold as followers of Hari. While his intention of erasing untouchability were praiseworthy, his execution of the idea, that is building solidarity among all, came at the cost of erasing the crucial differences and positing Brahminical Hinduism as sacrosanct or highest order of belief. Brajranjan Mani, in his book De-Brahmanizing History, constructs Dalit history to uncover subjugated knowledge and understand its conflict with dominant Brahminical ideology. He recognizes Dalit politics as a counter-narrative and emphasizes the role of ideology in sustaining hierarchy. He identifies Brahmanism as the dominant ideological system. I quote, "Ideology as an instrument of domination, ensuring that common people think and behave as the ruling elite wants them to, finds its archetypal expression in Brahmanism. Brahmanism is the main exploiting system of traditional Indian society. It stands for the aggregate of sacerdotal literature, social structure, and religio-political institutions masterminded by the elite to keep the masses ignorant, servile, and disunited. Brahmanism under caste ideology as a crucial instrument to dehumanize, divide, and dominate the productive majority functions smoothly along with the caste system. Mani builds a Dalit history with the purpose to understand and examine how they exist in conflict with dominant groups. Therefore, we are talking about the process of Dalit history writing. He presents an anti-caste theorizing and history in conflict with dominant ideologies and emphasizes on the role of Brahmanism and the intellectuals endorsing the ideology in constructing and perpetuating hierarchy in the society. In this way, he brings to attention both the ideology and the creators of those ideologies. Mani thus sees Brahmanism as an ideological social system rooted in power politics. He begins his theorizing by redefining caste not in the birth-based terms, but as a system of discrimination particularly intended to endorse the interests of the powerful few, in this case the Brahmins. Following Omved, who writes in her book Buddhism in India, published in 2003, and Kancha Ilaiah, who writes Why I Am Not a Hindu, published in 1996, Brajranjan Mani is of the opinion that due to the pervasion of Brahmanism, history needs to be re-examined and rewritten. He writes, Dalit Bahujan ideology, popularly referred to as Phule Ambedkarism, heroes of the social justice movement in modern India, rejects the Brahmanic version of caste and culture. Dalit historiography, therefore, can be seen as comprising of two amalgamated components, revision and retrieval. Two components that we have spoken for and seen perpetuating in subaltern historiography as well, and so do in many other marginalized history writings. In anti-caste theorizing, Dalit history gets written as a counter-hegemonic movement arising during and against the nationalist movement, which was Brahmanical in nature. To challenge the silencing, appropriation, and absorption of caste in dominant historical narratives, histories written on caste have focused on building an alternative narrative parallel to nationalist movement and recovering the Dalit leaders such as Phule, Ambedkar and Periyar in the process. Thereby, it presents a consolidated anti-caste movements parallel to the nationalist movement and theorizing the Dalit ideologies. Dalit writers and thinkers often draw upon Phule, Ambedkar and Periyar and relate at the level of personal experience to articulate their oppression and their erasure cultural and historical spheres. In establishing her version of Dalit historiography, Omved critiques two modes through which anti-caste movement has been predominantly represented. These are nationalism and left view. While nationalism depicted the anti-caste struggle as divisive, the Marxist view opted for co-opting caste within class purview, while Hindu nationalism called for a return to traditions in order to get rid of Western influence. Anti-caste politics criticized nationalism's attempt to subsume the majority within a Hindu fold. It challenged what Omved says, distortions and excessiousness. They attacked Hinduism itself by arguing that it was in essence Brahminical, caste-bound and irrational. They asserted that Hinduism has not been the religion and culture of the majority, but rather was an imposed religion, and that escaping exploitation today required the low castes to reject this imposition, to define themselves as non-Hindu and take a new religious identity. We can connect these narratives with Phule's The Aryan Invasion Theory, Ambedkar's return to Buddhism, and Periyar's the Dravida or the Adi Dravida movement, all of which will be discussed in the next lectures. Consequently, Phule and Ambedkar have become key figures in such theorizing. Marxists in India incorporated caste within the ongoing class struggle and termed it a fight against discriminatory socio-economic system in general. Urging for a merge into caste-class interests, noted CPI leader B.T. Ranadive writes, I quote, "The new situation calls for giving up the tradition of fighting caste battles in isolation from other toilers. For it has to be realized that the present socio-economic system is based on property relations which sustain both caste and class oppression. It is sheer deception to think of abolishing untouchability or caste with the landlords and monopolists dominating the economy and bourgeois landlord government in power. The caste problem is inevitably merged with the problem of ending the rule of bourgeois landlord class and moving forward to socialism." This is quoted from Caste, Class and Property Relations. Now, historian Bipan Chandra placed National Congress at the heart of democratic revolution in India, with working class and peasant movements incorporated within it and viewed, I quote, alternative stream of politics such as the communal and casteist movements which were not nationalists or anti-imperialist to have endorsed loyalist pro-colonial tendencies and thereby betraying the independence movement led by Congress. So, in Bipan Chandra's opinion, anti-caste movements created a division between the otherwise homogenized nationalist movement, and this is a very interesting point that we have to remember as to how even the dominant histories created an idea about anti-caste movements. Gail Omvedt opines, analysis of Dalit movement has suffered from both interpretations. It has been seen as diversionary either from the economic class struggle because of its argument for the necessity of struggling against social oppression, or in terms of the needs of a national struggle because of its insistence on putting the needs of the most oppressed or exploited group first, because of its willingness to treat the Indian elite, not foreign powers, as the main enemy. In other words, what Dalit movements did was, and this was seen as complicated by the dominant narratives, is that class was seen as a more immediate issue, and it was viewed that the anti-caste movements did not prioritize class. And secondly, it was argued that anti-caste movements found the enemy within, whereas it was the British colonizers who were the larger enemy outside home. Now, let us summarize today's lecture. The anti-caste movements led by the Dalits and non-Brahmins are characterized as radical efforts to dismantle the caste system and establish an egalitarian society. Unlike the 19th century nationalist and reformist movements such as Gandhi's Harijan movement, which aimed to integrate marginalized groups within Hinduism, the anti-caste movements sought to eliminate the caste system entirely, hence the term annihilate caste by Ambedkar. Scholars like Gail Omvedt and Brajranjan Mani analyze these movements as counter narratives to the dominant Brahmanical ideology that has historically perpetuated hierarchy and oppression. Mani interprets caste as a mechanism of discrimination designed to protect the interests of the Brahmanical elite. He emphasizes the need to reinterpret history from a Dalit perspective, aligning with the ideas of leaders like Phule, Ambedkar and Periyar, who rejected Brahmanical dominance. Dalit historiography focuses on revising mainstream narratives and reclaiming suppressed histories. It challenges both the nationalist and Marxist perspectives, wherein nationalists often saw anti-caste struggle as divisive and Marxists tended to subsume caste under the broad class struggle, thereby overlooking its unique dimensions. Ultimately, these anti-caste movements are not just responses to social and economic exploitation, but are also intellectual and ideological struggles to define or redefine identity and resist cultural erasure and appropriation. The anti-caste movements prioritize the perspectives and experiences of the most marginalized, rejecting the idea that the end of colonialism alone would bring true liberation. In the next class, we will learn about the noticed anti-caste leaders. Thank you.